Hello everyone! Today we're going to see Thomas Peaple again and find out about Aeschylus and his play The Persians. Welcome back to the programme.
Welcome.
So, just to get us started, who was Aeschylus?
Aeschylus was a Greek playwright. He wrote tragedies. Now, I should give a caveat that tragedy, when we're talking about ancient Greece, basically means serious plays. Over time, we've more specifically denoted tragedies having to have a sad ending. And while there are plenty of Greek tragedies that do have sad endings, some of them have happy or bittersweet endings, but they're still all called tragedies to distinguish them from comedies, i.e. they're not funny.
So, what is so special about the Persians?
Well, a bit of background. Aeschylus only wrote 7 plays that have survived, as far as we can tell. And I'm going to apologise now for using the phrase as far as we can tell, because that comes up a lot. And the reason we have to do that is so much is lost. And we never know. I could be talking to you here, and right now someone in Egypt is digging up a whole play on Aeschylus that's going to change everything we've been telling people for years. But basically, the 7 plays by Aeschylus, 3 of them are the Aristeia, the complete trilogy. Another 3 of them, unfortunately, well, 2 of them are part 1 of a trilogy. Now, the Greeks always wrote in trilogies, but Aeschylus was prone to writing chronological. So obviously, with only part 1, it feels incomplete, because it is, because the play was meant to start a theme that would be completed in part 2 and part 3. The same being true, so that's true of 2 of the surviving Aeschylus plays. Then 7 Against Thebes, which is the opposite, it's the conclusion of the trilogy. We don't have part 1 and 2. Plus, the final surviving part is believed to have been tampered with. It's believed an ending was tagged on later on to accommodate Sophocles' Antigone. So, that's no good because it's tampered with. 2 of them are only parts. And then we have the Persians. So the Persians is one of the few Aeschylus plays we have, and one of the few, even fewer that we can really appreciate. But the other reason is, it's one of only 2 plays, as far as we can tell, that were written about contemporary events, or relatively contemporary events. Most plays are set in what for the Greeks was at least the ancient past, if not, and hopefully in the next video on home we'll discuss it in more detail, entirely legendary. So we've got these 2 plays that we know of, written about events shortly after they were taking place. Aeschylus' Persians, and another play by another playwright called The Catcher in Miletus, which was performed once and banned forever, and unsurprisingly is now lost.
Do we know what sources Aeschylus drew from?
We don't, but as he was writing about events that occurred 7 or 8 years prior, we can assume his sources were either himself or other people who'd been at Salamis, so we don't know, but we can assume he had eyewitness and first-hand accounts. For these purposes, I'm treating eyewitness to mean literally you were in the battle, and first-hand could mean you may not have been in the battle, but you were around at the time talking to the people who were. So that's why I'm saying eyewitness and first-hand.
What are the advantages and disadvantages to using Aeschylus over Herodotus as a historical source?
Advantages are he was contemporary, he was writing, as I just mentioned, with people who knew the facts when it was fresh in their heads. Herodotus is relying on older memories unless he had some written sources now lost, but unless he had those, he was relying on fading memories from decades before. The disadvantage to Aeschylus is, well, there are 2 main things. The first one is it is nonetheless a play. It is not designed as a hist, or even claiming to be a history, and therefore we have to think about what he may have changed or adapted for dramatic purposes. After all, he's imagining at one point that a chorus of Persians told the Queen of Persia that Athens was destroyed, and the Queen of Persia, whose name I'm not using because the one way it's pronounced is slightly dodgy, but let's just say her name is spelt Atossa, sometimes pronounced Atossa, but there is an alternative pronunciation that is a little rude. But anyway, the point is this crowd of Persian elders say to the queen that Athens is fighting, and she says, "But we destroyed Athens, it's gone." And they reply, "Oh no, as long as Athens' fleet survives, Athens survives." I don't think it's very likely, do you, that they'd have actually had that conversation, which shows that his primary intention was to be drama. Let's not forget this was still a play being performed to win a festival, with two other plays that are lost, but as it's believed they were thematic connections rather than chronological. It doesn't have the same bearing on enjoying the Persians, but nonetheless, it was a play designed for dramatic purposes rather than with a primary interest in recording history. The other big disadvantage is bias. I mean, his narrative basically portrays the Battle of Salamis as effectively the end of the Persian Wars, and suggests that the later Battle of Plataea was essentially a mop-up job, which, quite frankly, is preposterous. It would be a bit like suggesting that after D-Day, World War II was won and the march on Berlin by the Russians was a clean-up job. It would be the equivalent of saying, oh yeah, we'd already won the war at D-Day, that bit was just an afterthought really. It would be the equivalent of that. Plataea was very significant. I'm not saying Salamis wasn't, but suggesting that Plataea was something of a mop-up job when the war was already won, which Aeschylus implies by giving it about 10 lines, I'm afraid shows a clear partiality to the role of Athens over Sparta in that war. So, yeah, the advantages are the freshness of memories, the disadvantages are dramatic purposes and very evident bias.
Speaking of the thematics, what themes are present in the Persians?
Well, the lost plays, it's believed, were both about hubris, and it's believed that that was the connection between the three plays that the Persians was part of. So, a big part of the play's theme, I would argue, is overstretching, going too far. The Persians are basically warned in the play that they went wrong by going to Greece because it was further than they were intended to go. They were doing well, what they had was enough. They shouldn't have tried to take Greece, and now they paid for it by being humiliated. So that would be the main theme I would identify, aside from, as I mentioned before, Athenian patriotism. It is very much the story of how Athens, that was apparently done for, fought back.
Does Aeschylus make the Persians evil?
In my opinion, I wouldn't say exactly evil, but as I mentioned above, guilty of hubris. But hubris is sort of portrayed as an understandable but nonetheless a big flaw rather than something that makes them particularly wicked.
And just to round things off, what, if anything, would a student of ancient Greece gain by studying the Persians?
Well, if someone's interested in the history, it's an interesting alternative perspective to Herodotus on that part of the Persian War, and it does give some interesting insights into Herodotus. For example, Herodotus claims there were 1,207 ships in the Persian fleet. Now this is a very unusually specific number, he normally deals in hundreds. In fact, most fleets he referred to were always 600 ships. The point is, he clearly seemed to round, up or down, we don't know, but he rounded his numbers. So why here is it that specific? Well, some believe, because in Aeschylus' Persians, there's a reference to 1,000 ships, of which 207 were special fast ships, and it's just possible that he misheard Aeschylus' Persians and told everyone it was 1,207 ships, not realising it was actually 1,000 ships. So in that sense it has an interesting insight into Herodotus, which obviously means it was likely a source of Herodotus, so a comparison between the two sources is important. However, in some ways the play offers as much, if not more, to a student of Greek tragedy, because as I mentioned above, we only have 7 of his plays. 3 of them are harder to study because they're incomplete. So when you've read the Oresteia, if you want anything else by Aeschylus that doesn't feel incomplete, read the Persians. Dramatically, it's very interesting.
Thank you very much for being on this programme, and hope to see you again soon sometime, perhaps. And thank you again, Thomas Peaple, for joining us on the programme. Hope to see you again soon, and to everyone watching, it was lovely having you here.